Why do certain disappointments stay with a person for years while others quietly fade away? Why can a single betrayal reshape the way someone sees trust, people, and even themselves? Why do old wounds continue influencing present decisions long after the event itself has passed? And why does life sometimes feel as though it keeps repeating the same lesson in different forms, no matter how far a person tries to move forward? There is a difficult truth hidden beneath these questions. Most people believe they suffer because of what happened to them. The Stoics saw something deeper. They understood that much of human suffering comes not from the event itself, but from the struggle against what has already happened. The event passes, the resistance remains, and that resistance can last for years. Over time, a pattern begins to emerge. The same frustrations return wearing different faces. The same fears appear in different situations. The same disappointments arrive through different people and different circumstances. Yet beneath those changing details, the lesson remains remarkably similar. Many people spend their lives searching for certainty in an uncertain world, permanence in temporary things, and control over what was never truly theirs to control. When reality refuses to cooperate, they assume life is working against them. In truth, life is often revealing something they have not yet learned to see. This is where Stoicism offers a different perspective, not a way to avoid pain, but a way to understand it. Not a promise that life will become easier, but an invitation to stop fighting battles that cannot be won. Because the moment a person begins seeing reality as it is, rather than as they wish it to be, something changes. Pain starts becoming insight. Setbacks begin becoming instruction, and the very experiences that once felt like punishment begin revealing a deeper kind of wisdom. There comes a point in life when a person begins to notice something strange about suffering. The pain they carry is not always connected to the event itself. Sometimes the event is long gone. The conversation ended months ago. The relationship has already fallen apart. The opportunity disappeared years earlier. Yet the discomfort remains, lingering beneath the surface, as if the mind refuses to let it go. At first, this seems confusing because common sense suggests that pain comes from what happened. If someone lies, the lie hurts. If someone leaves, the departure hurts. If something valuable is lost, the loss hurts. Yet life repeatedly presents situations where two people experience the same event and emerge with entirely different levels of suffering. One gradually accepts what happened and moves forward. The other continues replaying the event long after it has passed. The difference reveals something important. The event creates the wound. The meaning attached to it often determines how long it stays open. Most people spend years believing reality should operate according to a set of unwritten rules. Loyalty should be returned. Effort should be rewarded. Kindness should be appreciated. Honesty should create trust. These assumptions feel reasonable because they reflect the way many people try to live. If they offer respect, they expect respect in return. If they remain dependable, they expect dependability from others. If they care deeply, they assume that care will eventually be recognized. Over time, these expectations become so deeply embedded that they no longer feel like expectations. They feel like facts. The problem begins when reality refuses to cooperate. A person may spend years supporting someone only to discover that support was never valued in the same way. Someone may act with integrity and still watch less principled people move ahead. Another may offer patience, understanding, and loyalty only to encounter betrayal from the very person they trusted most. In moments like these, the pain often feels larger than the event itself. The mind struggles to process what happened because reality has violated an assumption that felt unquestionable. The pain is not only about the outcome, it comes from watching an assumption collapse. As Epictetus observed, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." This is why certain disappointments linger for so long. A person is not only grieving what happened, they are grieving the version of reality they believed existed. They are confronting the possibility that life operates according to principles very different from the ones they imagined. Expectations create the illusion of predictability. They make the world feel manageable. The moment that illusion breaks, uncertainty rushes in. The world suddenly feels less stable than it once did. Naturally, the mind resists this realization. It searches for explanations that might restore order. Why did this happen? Why was I treated this way? Why wasn't I appreciated? These questions repeat because they are attempting to solve a problem that cannot be solved through analysis alone. Beneath every question sits a deeper assumption. Reality should have behaved differently. As long as that assumption remains unchallenged, the mind keeps arguing with a past that cannot be changed. It revisits old conversations, replays old memories, and imagines alternative versions of events where everything unfolded according to expectation. The Stoics recognized this tendency centuries ago. They understood that much of human suffering originates not from reality itself, but from resistance to reality. This does not mean pain is imaginary. Loss still hurts. Betrayal still hurts. Failure still hurts. The Stoic insight is more subtle. Suffering grows when reality is expected to be something other than what it is. The event happens once. The argument with the event can continue for years. What makes this especially difficult is that expectations often disguise themselves as moral truths. A person may genuinely deserve better treatment. They may have acted honorably. They may have shown kindness when others did not. They may have fulfilled every responsibility expected of them. Yet reality does not distribute outcomes according to what feels deserved. It never has. The world contains countless variables beyond personal control. Other people's fears, ambitions, insecurities, desires, and limitations all influence outcomes in ways that cannot be predicted or managed. This realization can feel uncomfortable because it removes a sense of certainty. Yet hidden inside that discomfort is a kind of freedom. The moment a person stops demanding guarantees from life, they begin interacting with reality more honestly. They stop confusing preferences with promises. They can still hope for loyalty without requiring it. They can still value honesty without expecting everyone to share that value. They can still act with integrity while understanding that outcomes remain uncertain. Their actions become guided by principles rather than expectations. Once a person begins understanding that expectations are often responsible for much of their suffering, another realization quietly emerges. If expectations create so much frustration and disappointment, why are they so difficult to let go of? The answer is that expectations create the illusion of control. They make life feel safer. If I do everything right, things will work out. If I care enough, they will stay. If I sacrifice enough, I will be valued. These beliefs are comforting because they suggest outcomes can be secured through effort alone. Yet life repeatedly demonstrates otherwise. A person may give everything to a relationship and still watch it fall apart. They may dedicate years to a goal only to discover that circumstances beyond their control change everything. They may treat others with kindness and receive indifference in return. Experiences like these challenge the belief that effort alone guarantees results. This is where many people experience their first real psychological awakening. They begin to see how much energy they have spent trying to manage things that were never truly theirs to manage. Other people's opinions, other people's loyalty, other people's choices, other people's feelings. The more tightly they hold on, the more anxious they become. They spend years monitoring how they are perceived, adjusting their behavior to earn approval, or sacrificing parts of themselves in exchange for acceptance. Yet no matter how much effort is invested, other people's thoughts remain beyond reach. The same pattern appears in relationships. People try to prevent disappointment before it occurs. They try to secure certainty before certainty is possible. They monitor every interaction for signs of reassurance. But emotional stability built upon variables outside personal control is always fragile. A delayed message creates anxiety. A disagreement feels threatening. A change in someone's mood becomes a source of concern. The burden becomes exhausting because it asks the mind to perform an impossible task. Human beings can influence one another, but influence is not control. The Stoics understood this with remarkable clarity. They taught that peace begins when a person separates what belongs to them from what does not. Their actions belong to them. Their character belongs to them. Their choices belong to them. Beyond that boundary lies a world they can influence but never command. Problems arise when those boundaries become blurred. The mind begins searching externally for stability that can only be established internally. A subtle shift occurs when a person starts focusing on what is genuinely within their authority. Instead of obsessing over outcomes, they focus on effort. Instead of seeking approval, they focus on integrity. Instead of demanding guarantees, they learn to tolerate uncertainty. The world does not become predictable, but their relationship with uncertainty changes. They stop attaching their peace to outcomes that remain beyond their control. This is not indifference. It is the ability to care deeply without becoming emotionally dependent on a particular result. There is a quiet strength in that understanding. Life remains unpredictable. People remain complex. Outcomes remain uncertain. Yet the mind becomes calmer because it is no longer trying to govern what cannot be governed. And gradually, a person realizes that much of the weight they carried for years was never theirs to carry in the first place. If these ideas help you see life a little more clearly, consider subscribing. Not to collect more information, but to continue developing the kind of perspective that remains steady when circumstances do not. Reality has never promised fairness, appreciation, or certainty. It has never guaranteed that effort will always be rewarded or that good intentions will always produce good outcomes. Accepting this does not create pessimism, it creates resilience. The person stops measuring reality against impossible standards and starts working with what actually exists. In that space, something remarkable happens. The energy once spent fighting reality becomes available for growth. The mind becomes quieter. The need to argue with the past begins to fade, and life, while still imperfect, becomes far easier to carry because it is no longer being compared to a version of itself that was never promised in the first place. Once a person begins to understand that expectations are often responsible for a large part of their suffering, another realization quietly emerges. If expectations create so much frustration, disappointment, and emotional exhaustion, why are they so difficult to let go of? The answer is rarely obvious because expectations do not present themselves as sources of pain. They present themselves as sources of safety. They create a sense of order in a world that often feels unpredictable. Deep down, many people carry a belief that if they behave correctly, life will respond accordingly. If they work hard enough, they will succeed. If they love deeply enough, they will be loved in return. If they remain loyal, loyalty will find its way back to them. These assumptions are comforting because they make reality feel manageable. They suggest that outcomes can be secured through effort alone, and for a while, that belief can feel reassuring. The difficulty appears when life begins demonstrating that outcomes are influenced by far more than personal effort. A person may give everything they have to a relationship and still watch it fall apart. They may dedicate years to a goal only to discover that circumstances beyond their control alter the outcome. They may treat others with kindness and respect, yet receive indifference in return. These experiences are painful not only because of what is lost, but because they challenge the belief that life can be controlled through sufficient effort. Suddenly, the mind is forced to confront a possibility it has spent years avoiding. Perhaps doing everything right does not guarantee the result that was hoped for. Perhaps reality operates according to principles that extend far beyond personal intentions. This realization often marks the beginning of a deeper form of awareness. At first, it feels uncomfortable because it exposes how much energy has been invested in controlling things that were never fully controllable. Many people spend years attempting to manage the perceptions of others. They carefully choose their words, adjust their behavior, and shape their decisions around how they might be judged. Others become consumed with earning approval, believing that enough achievement, enough sacrifice, or enough success will eventually secure acceptance. Yet no matter how much effort is invested, other people's thoughts remain beyond reach. Their opinions continue to change according to experiences, emotions, biases, and circumstances that exist entirely outside personal influence. The same pattern appears in relationships. Someone may devote themselves completely to another person, believing that enough care will guarantee permanence. They become responsible not only for their own emotions, but for the emotions of someone else. They try to prevent disappointment before it occurs. They attempt to solve problems before they appear. They monitor every interaction, searching for reassurance that everything is secure. Yet the more tightly they hold on, the more fragile their peace becomes. Their emotional state begins depending on variables they cannot control. A delayed response creates anxiety. A change in behavior creates uncertainty. A disagreement feels threatening. What began as a desire for connection gradually transforms into a struggle for certainty. This is where many people encounter a form of exhaustion they cannot easily explain. On the surface, it appears they are simply trying to make things work. Beneath the surface, they are carrying responsibilities that were never theirs to carry. They are attempting to control how others feel, what others think, and what others choose. The burden becomes overwhelming because it asks the mind to perform an impossible task. Human beings can influence one another, but influence is not control. No amount of effort can completely govern another person's decisions. No amount of worry can guarantee a specific outcome. No amount of preparation can eliminate uncertainty from life. The Stoics recognized this tension with remarkable clarity. They observed that much of human distress originates from confusion about what belongs within personal authority and what does not. This distinction appears simple at first, yet its implications reach into nearly every area of life. Personal actions belong within one's authority. Personal values belong within one's authority. Choices, judgments, and responses belong within one's authority. Beyond that boundary exists an enormous territory that cannot be commanded. The behavior of others exists there. The outcomes of efforts exist there. External recognition exists there. Fortune itself exists there. Problems arise when the mind attempts to claim ownership over territory that was never available for ownership. Once those boundaries become blurred, anxiety often follows. The mind begins constantly monitoring external conditions in search of stability. It seeks reassurance where reassurance cannot truly be found. It becomes dependent on outcomes for emotional balance. Success creates temporary relief. Failure creates disproportionate distress. Approval creates confidence. Criticism creates insecurity. Emotional equilibrium rises and falls according to forces outside personal direction. This is why so many people feel trapped despite achieving things they once believed would bring peace. They continue searching externally for something that can only be established internally. This shift is often mistaken for indifference, but it is something entirely different. Indifference is the absence of care. What develops here is the ability to care deeply without becoming enslaved to the outcome. A person can still pursue goals, invest in relationships, and strive for meaningful achievements. The difference is that they stop tying their peace to results that remain uncertain. They give their best effort without demanding guarantees from reality. They engage fully while accepting that not everything rests within their hands. Marcus Aurelius expressed this idea simply: You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That realization changes the way a person moves through life. They stop measuring every experience by whether it unfolds exactly as they hoped. They focus on the quality of their actions rather than the certainty of the outcome. And in doing so, they discover a quieter, more durable form of peace, one that remains steady even when circumstances do not. Understanding the limits of control is one thing. Living with those limits after life has wounded you is something else entirely. The moment hardship becomes personal, the mind often changes its strategy. It no longer focuses on growth or possibility. It focuses on protection. This shift happens quietly. A betrayal occurs. A rejection arrives unexpectedly. A disappointment exposes a vulnerability that was never anticipated. The experience ends, but something remains behind. A new layer of caution begins forming beneath everyday thoughts. At first it appears reasonable. The person tells themselves they are simply being careful. They are learning from experience. They are avoiding mistakes they once made. In many cases, that assessment is partially true. Experience does teach valuable lessons. Pain often reveals realities that comfort never could. Yet not every adaptation created by pain is beneficial. Some lessons create wisdom. Others create fear disguised as wisdom. The difficulty is that both can feel remarkably similar in the beginning. A person who has been deceived becomes more observant. Someone who has experienced rejection becomes more aware of social dynamics. Someone who has been disappointed repeatedly becomes more cautious when placing trust in others. These responses are natural. They emerge from the mind's desire to avoid unnecessary suffering. Human beings are remarkably adaptive. Once the brain identifies something as dangerous, it becomes motivated to prevent that danger from returning. This ability has helped people survive for generations. It allows lessons to be remembered and threats to be recognized more quickly in the future. The problem arises when the mind stops distinguishing between actual danger and the memory of danger. Gradually, the world begins looking different. Situations that once felt neutral start carrying emotional weight. A delayed response to a message no longer feels insignificant. It becomes something to analyze. A brief change in someone's mood becomes a source of concern. A small mistake at work begins feeling larger than it actually is. The mind starts searching for patterns, trying to identify potential problems before they appear. From the outside, this may look like awareness. Internally, however, it often feels exhausting. Every interaction requires interpretation. Every uncertainty demands attention. Every possibility becomes something to prepare for. The person believes they are becoming more intelligent, more perceptive, and more prepared. Yet beneath that preparation, a different process may be unfolding. The mind becomes so accustomed to scanning for problems that the behavior starts feeling normal. It begins interpreting uncertainty as danger rather than as a natural part of life. A person may spend hours thinking about conversations that have not happened. They may mentally rehearse future conflicts. They may imagine negative outcomes repeatedly, believing this preparation will reduce future pain. In reality, the opposite often occurs. The mind experiences the emotional burden of those imagined scenarios long before reality provides any reason to do so. Energy is consumed by events that exist only as possibilities. The body reacts to anticipated threats as though they are already present. Stress increases. Rest becomes more difficult. Mental quiet becomes rare. As this pattern continues, something subtle begins occurring. The present moment becomes increasingly crowded. Instead of experiencing life directly, the person experiences it through layers of anticipation. They listen while simultaneously preparing for disappointment. They trust while simultaneously expecting betrayal. They pursue goals while simultaneously imagining failure. Their attention becomes divided between what is actually happening and what might happen in the future. Over time, anticipation starts occupying more mental space than reality itself. The future becomes more influential than the present. What makes this particularly challenging is that anticipation often feels productive. It creates the illusion of preparation. The person believes they are protecting themselves from future pain. Yet, genuine preparation and chronic anticipation are not the same thing. Preparation involves action. Anticipation often involves rumination. Preparation addresses what can be influenced. Anticipation becomes consumed with what cannot be controlled. One creates confidence. The other creates fatigue. The distinction matters because many people spend years carrying emotional burdens that serve no practical purpose. Once a person begins noticing how much of their attention is spent anticipating problems, another uncomfortable truth starts becoming visible. Human beings rarely suffer only from what is happening in front of them. More often, they suffer from what they imagine could happen next. The mind has a remarkable ability to leave the present moment and travel into futures that do not yet exist. It can create detailed scenarios, complete with emotional reactions, consequences, and fears, all without requiring reality to participate at all. A person can be sitting safely in a quiet room while mentally experiencing failure, rejection, embarrassment, loss, or disaster. Nothing has happened, yet the body responds as though something already has. The heart races, the chest tightens, thoughts accelerate. The imagined future begins influencing the present more powerfully than the present itself. This tendency often develops so gradually that people stop noticing it. They assume their worries are simply part of being responsible. They believe thinking through every possible outcome is a form of preparation. After all, it seems sensible to anticipate challenges. It seems wise to consider what might go wrong. There is value in foresight. There is value in planning. Yet somewhere along the way, planning can quietly become something else. Instead of preparing for life, the mind begins rehearsing suffering. Instead of exploring possibilities, it becomes trapped inside them. Seneca warned about this tendency centuries ago when he wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." The distinction is subtle, but its consequences are profound. Planning seeks clarity. Worry seeks certainty. Planning ends when a useful action is identified. Worry continues long after action is no longer possible. One prepares a person for what may come. The other keeps them emotionally invested in futures that do not yet exist. And before long, the mind begins carrying burdens that reality has not asked it to carry. A person may spend an entire afternoon thinking about a difficult conversation scheduled for next week. They imagine every response, every misunderstanding, every negative outcome. By the time the conversation actually arrives, they have already experienced it dozens of times inside their mind. Most of those imagined versions never occur, yet the emotional energy spent preparing for them was entirely real. The stress was real, the tension was real, the exhaustion was real. This is one of the most fascinating and frustrating features of human psychology. The mind can generate genuine suffering from purely hypothetical events. Reality becomes optional. Imagination is enough. The Stoics recognized this long before modern psychology began studying the mechanics of anxiety and anticipation. They understood that fear often expands when it exists only in thought. An event that may be manageable in reality can become overwhelming when examined repeatedly through imagination. The mind adds details. It enlarges consequences. It creates certainty where only possibility exists. What begins as a concern slowly transforms into a prediction. Then the prediction begins feeling like an inevitability. Eventually, the person reacts emotionally to something that remains entirely uncertain. The imagined future acquires the weight of a real experience. Something important is lost when this happens. The ability to fully experience ordinary moments begins fading into the background. A peaceful evening becomes overshadowed by concerns about tomorrow. A meaningful conversation becomes interrupted by worries about the future. Even positive experiences become difficult to enjoy because the mind immediately starts calculating how they might end. Instead of experiencing gratitude, the person experiences anticipation of loss. Instead of appreciating what exists, they become preoccupied with what could disappear. The fear of future pain begins contaminating present peace. This is why chronic worry often feels so exhausting. The exhaustion does not come from physical effort. It comes from maintaining continuous emotional engagement with imagined situations. The mind rarely rests because there is always another possibility to analyze, another outcome to predict, another scenario to prepare for. Even moments of calm can feel uncomfortable because the mind has become accustomed to searching for potential threats. Stillness feels unfamiliar. Silence feels suspicious. The absence of problems is interpreted as the period before the next problem appears. The irony is that this habit often prevents the very thing it seeks to create. Worry promises safety, but it rarely produces it. Instead, it creates a life lived in anticipation rather than participation. Attention becomes divided between reality and imagination. Energy becomes invested in futures that may never arrive. The person begins carrying burdens that do not belong to the present moment. Those burdens accumulate slowly until they start feeling normal. Yet normal does not mean necessary. Over time, there is another consequence that emerges from constantly anticipating pain, and it is one that many people fail to recognize until it has already become part of their personality. The mind can remain alert for only so long before that alertness begins demanding a price. At first, the effort feels manageable. A little extra caution seems reasonable. A little emotional distance feels protective. Remaining guarded appears responsible. Yet maintaining those defenses day after day, month after month, and year after year gradually creates a different kind of exhaustion. Not the exhaustion that comes from physical labor, not the exhaustion that sleep can fix. This is psychological fatigue. It comes from carrying emotional armor everywhere, even when there is no battle taking place. The person may look composed from the outside, but internally they are constantly monitoring, evaluating, predicting, and protecting. That invisible effort consumes far more energy than most people realize. Because this fatigue develops gradually, people often adapt to it without noticing. They stop asking whether they are carrying too much and start assuming that constant tension is simply part of adult life. The nervous system becomes accustomed to remaining on guard. Relaxation begins feeling unfamiliar. Vulnerability begins feeling dangerous. Trust begins feeling risky. The person may not consciously decide to close themselves off from others. More often, it happens through a series of small adjustments. They share a little less than they once did. They become more selective about what they reveal. They keep certain thoughts private. They stop expressing disappointment openly. They stop expecting understanding. Each adjustment appears insignificant on its own. Together, they slowly reshape the way a person relates to the world. Different people develop different forms of protection. Some become emotionally detached. They convince themselves that caring less will hurt less. Others become fiercely independent. They avoid relying on anyone because dependence feels like vulnerability, and vulnerability feels unsafe. Some develop humor as a shield, turning painful experiences into jokes before anyone has the chance to see the deeper wound underneath. Others stay relentlessly busy. They fill every moment with work, goals, responsibilities, and distractions because constant movement prevents them from sitting still long enough to feel what remains unresolved. The strategies vary, but the purpose remains remarkably similar. The mind is attempting to avoid future pain by reducing exposure to anything that might create it. The challenge is that protection often works, at least in the beginning. Emotional distance can reduce disappointment. Independence can reduce reliance on others. Humor can make difficult experiences easier to carry. Productivity can create a sense of purpose and control. These strategies are not inherently harmful. In many situations, they serve an important purpose. They help people recover. They help people adapt. They help them keep moving forward when standing still feels impossible. But as Carl Jung observed, what was wounded in childhood must be consciously suffered in adulthood, or it will direct your life from the unconscious. Problems begin when temporary protection becomes a permanent way of living. What was once a response to pain slowly becomes an identity. The person no longer uses the armor when necessary. They start wearing it everywhere. The habits that once helped them heal begin shaping the way they see themselves, other people, and the world. What started as protection gradually becomes limitation, and the very defenses designed to prevent suffering begin creating a different kind of suffering altogether. Yet emotional distance and emotional strength are not the same thing. Emotional strength allows a person to remain open while accepting uncertainty. Emotional distance avoids uncertainty by avoiding openness altogether. One creates resilience, the other creates separation. The distinction is subtle, which is why it is often missed. A person may genuinely believe they have become stronger when, in reality, they have simply become more protected. Protection has its place. No one should move through life without boundaries. The problem arises when boundaries become barriers, and caution becomes a permanent state of being. The Stoics understood something that is often misunderstood today. They were not advocating emotional numbness. They were not encouraging people to stop caring. Their goal was not to eliminate attachment to life. Instead, they sought a way of engaging fully without becoming controlled by fear. They recognized that pain is an unavoidable part of existence, but they also understood that avoiding all vulnerability is not a solution. To avoid vulnerability completely would require avoiding many of the very experiences that give life meaning. Friendship requires vulnerability. Love requires vulnerability. Trust requires vulnerability. Even personal growth requires vulnerability, because growth often demands confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself. The fear of being hurt can become so influential that it quietly begins shaping every decision. The person tells themselves they are being careful, but beneath the caution sits a deeper motivation. They are trying to guarantee safety in a world that cannot provide guarantees. The harder they pursue absolute safety, the narrower their life becomes. Opportunities are approached with hesitation. Relationships are approached with suspicion. Possibilities are approached with caution rather than curiosity. The world gradually feels smaller because the range of experiences considered safe becomes smaller as well. Eventually, a person reaches a point where they must confront an important question. Is the armor still serving a purpose, or has it become a burden? The answer is rarely simple. Some protection remains necessary. Wisdom demands discernment. Experience should inform future decisions. But there is a difference between learning from pain and organizing an entire life around avoiding it. One creates maturity, the other creates imprisonment. Real strength begins emerging when a person no longer needs constant protection to feel secure. They can remain thoughtful without becoming fearful. They can remain careful without becoming closed. And they can engage with life fully, understanding that while vulnerability creates the possibility of pain, it also creates the possibility of everything that makes life meaningful in the first place. This argument takes many forms. Sometimes it sounds like resentment. Sometimes it sounds like regret. Sometimes it appears as endless analysis, as though thinking about the event one more time might somehow produce a different outcome. Beneath all these variations sits the same underlying resistance. Life should not have happened this way. The event itself may be over, but the struggle against the event continues. This is what gives many forms of suffering their remarkable persistence. The person is not only carrying the original wound, they are carrying the ongoing expectation that the wound should never have existed. The Stoics approached this problem from a perspective that remains surprisingly relevant today. They did not spend their lives trying to eliminate difficulty. They did not assume that hardship represented a malfunction in the structure of existence. Instead, they began with a simple observation. Pain is part of life. Loss is part of life. Uncertainty is part of life. Change is part of life. These realities are not exceptions to the human experience. They are woven into it. The problem begins when people expect life to provide something it was never designed to provide. Permanent comfort, permanent certainty, permanent protection from difficulty. Once that assumption is questioned, something interesting begins to happen. Pain does not disappear, but its meaning starts changing. Difficulty is no longer interpreted as proof that life is unfair or broken. Instead, it becomes part of the terrain. A difficult conversation becomes a challenge rather than a catastrophe. A disappointment becomes an experience rather than a personal condemnation. A setback becomes information rather than evidence of failure. The event remains difficult, but the mind stops adding unnecessary layers of resistance on top of it. The person begins responding to what is actually happening instead of fighting what has already happened. This shift requires a different relationship with discomfort. Instead of immediately trying to escape it, a person learns to observe it. They become curious about their reactions. They notice how quickly the mind moves toward resistance. They observe the stories being created around the experience. Little by little, they stop treating discomfort as an enemy. They begin recognizing it as part of being human. The goal is not to enjoy pain or seek hardship unnecessarily. The goal is to stop granting pain the power to define reality itself. There is a certain freedom that emerges from this understanding. The person no longer spends every moment trying to arrange life into a shape that guarantees comfort. They stop expecting certainty from uncertain circumstances. They stop demanding permanence from temporary things. They stop measuring every experience according to whether it feels pleasant or unpleasant. Their attention shifts towards something more stable. They focus on how they respond rather than what they receive. They focus on their conduct rather than their circumstances. The external world remains unpredictable, but their relationship with that unpredictability begins changing. For many people, the lesson revolves around certainty. There is a deep desire to know what will happen next, to know who will stay, to know whether efforts will succeed, to know that plans will unfold as expected. Certainty feels safe because it removes the burden of the unknown, yet life has never operated according to guarantees. Every meaningful part of existence contains uncertainty. Relationships contain uncertainty. Health contains uncertainty. Success contains uncertainty. Even tomorrow contains uncertainty. Despite this reality, many people continue searching for absolute security in a world that cannot provide it. They postpone peace until certainty arrives, unaware that certainty is the very thing they are least likely to receive. Yet Marcus Aurelius offered a reminder that cuts through this illusion. Observe constantly that all things take place by change, and accustom yourself to consider that the nature of the universe loves nothing so much as to change the things which are and to make new things like them. The challenge begins when temporary things are expected to behave as though they are permanent. Every experience eventually changes. Every season eventually passes. Every chapter eventually gives way to another. When people forget this, they start treating change as an interruption rather than as a natural feature of life. They resist what has always been true, and the more tightly they cling to permanence, the more painful every ending becomes. Acceptance does not remove the sadness of change, but it prevents that sadness from turning into bitterness. It allows a person to appreciate what exists without demanding that it last forever. This is why loss often feels so disorienting. The pain itself is real, but part of the suffering comes from the expectation that what existed would continue indefinitely. The mind becomes attached not only to the thing that was lost, but also to the assumption that it would remain. When reality eventually reveals otherwise, the emotional impact extends beyond the event itself. It challenges a deeper belief about how life should work. Yet life has always been in motion. Nothing has ever stood still for long. Understanding this does not eliminate sadness when something ends, but it changes the relationship with endings. They stop feeling like violations of reality and begin appearing as expressions of reality. The Stoics spent considerable time reflecting on these truths because they understood that freedom does not emerge from controlling circumstances. Circumstances will always contain elements beyond personal influence. The behavior of others remains uncertain. The future remains uncertain. Fortune remains uncertain. Trying to dominate every external variable creates endless frustration because the task itself is impossible. No amount of effort can guarantee complete control over a world filled with factors beyond individual authority. The more tightly a person clings to that goal, the more anxious and exhausted they become. The struggle never ends because the objective itself cannot be achieved. This does not mean pain disappears. Loss still hurts. Rejection still hurts. Failure still hurts. Human emotions do not vanish simply because someone adopts a different perspective. The difference is that painful experiences stop becoming the sole lens through which life is interpreted. They remain events rather than identities. A disappointment becomes something that happened rather than proof of personal inadequacy. A betrayal becomes an experience rather than a permanent definition of humanity. A failure becomes feedback rather than a verdict. The event retains its reality, but it loses its ability to dominate the entire story. In that space, pain begins serving a different function. It stops acting solely as something to avoid and starts revealing something worth understanding. Difficult experiences expose attachments, expectations, fears, and assumptions that might otherwise remain hidden. They reveal where dependence on certainty has become excessive. They reveal where control has been pursued beyond its limits. They reveal where peace has been attached to conditions that cannot be guaranteed. In this way, suffering becomes more than an obstacle. It becomes instruction. Life continues presenting challenges because challenge is woven into existence itself. The goal is not to reach a point where hardship never appears again. Such a point does not exist. The goal is to develop a way of meeting hardship that no longer turns every difficulty into a crisis. A person learns to remain steady amid uncertainty, adaptable amid change, and thoughtful amid discomfort. The lessons may continue arriving, but they arrive to a mind that no longer fights reality at every turn. And when that happens, something remarkable occurs. What once felt like punishment begins looking more like guidance. What once felt like evidence that life was against you becomes evidence that life was teaching you. And that lesson, once fully understood, changes everything. Life does not become easier because pain disappears. It becomes easier when pain no longer controls the way you see yourself, your future, or the world around you. Every challenge carries a lesson. Every setback carries a choice. And every difficult season offers an opportunity to become a little wiser, a little stronger, and a little more at peace with what cannot be controlled. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal and for spending this time reflecting on these ideas. If this message resonated with you, continue the journey by watching one of the videos on your screen now. The next lesson may be exactly what you need to hear at this moment. Until next time, take care of your mind, guard your peace, and remember, true strength is not found in avoiding life's hardships, but in learning how to walk through them with wisdom.